will be about 45 minutes long. We'll roll through what the requirements for admission are for all students, regardless of which major they're applying to. We'll also roll through what the requirements based on your specific major you should expect. We'll end with just different tools you can use. I think that's the piece that can be so confusing about the transfer process. One, if you've never had anyone in your family transfer before, or if it's just an entirely new process for you. It's unsettling. You're not sure what to turn to, who to ask the questions to. You have a great staff here at your disposal, but obviously every school you're applying to has different requirements. So I'll talk about the different tools and resources you can use to help guide you through the process. For those who have applied in the past, I think one of the biggest difference in the transfer process, it feels much more straightforward. At the first year level, we're trying to anticipate or predict how strong of a transfer applicant someone will be, or how strong of a student or a college student they'll be, I should say. At the transfer level, we can see exactly what type of college student you've been, because you have classes under your belt. So that's one of the big differences, but obviously we want to make sure that those requirements and how to go about pursuing them is abundantly clear to you. So we'll touch on those resources you can use. And finally, we'll wrap up by going through the different timeline that you'll want to be sure you're paying attention to. That's another major difference between our first year process and our transfer process that you'll want to stay aware of. Before I jump in too far though, have any of you gotten the chance to join a USC transfer information session before? Perfect. So if you have, it's the exact same presentation, but it's always good to get a refresher on that. And again, this is a great opportunity to get your questions answered about your specific classes, about your specific major that you might be applying to. So we'll definitely dig into all of that. But just to start, USC is a large private research institution. We're on the native lands of the Tonga peoples in downtown LA, about 2 miles south of downtown Los Angeles, with just a handful of students, around 49,500. But our goal is to just respect the fact that everyone's going to be looking for something different out of their collegiate experience. Some people want that small liberal arts college feel. Some people might want a conservatory style music education, or Division I sports and rah-rah school spirit environment, or a research institution. And our goal is to really blend all of those things on the grand platform of a large institution in the heart of a major city. So we're constantly working to break that number down quickly so it doesn't just feel like you're lost amongst the numbers. You can see that even having a larger student body, the average class size at USC is still 26 and a student to faculty ratio of 9:1. Your first year, for some of your intro classes there, you may have some of those larger lecture hall style classes, especially if you're a first year transfer. But the rule is that all classes at USC must be taught by a professor, not by a grad student or a TA. And any class that has more than 55 students in it has to have a TA attached to it. So you'll have lecture with your professor 2, maybe 3 times a week, and then you'll break out for a lab or a discussion section once a week with the smaller subset of your peers and the TA to go over the material in a bit more depth. I did my undergrad at SC, and I'd say that probably by like sophomore year, my classes were averaging around 30 students. By senior year, it was like 15, 20. There was nowhere to hide. You were answering that question. You were engaging in that conversation. Wrapping up my master's degree right now, and my class tonight has 17 students in it. So it definitely becomes much smaller very quickly, especially as you get into more of those major oriented classes. I'll also say for USC, and just to do a quick check, can you hear me on Zoom, hear and see before I get too deep into things? Keep rolling. They'll find me if they need me. Getting into what the transfers at USC looks like though. She might have people there in the office. USC's mission statement actually has language in it that refers to transfer students, just because we feel like transfer students really do bring something different to our campus community, be it lived experience, work experience, military experience. So we really want to make sure that we are supporting transfer students when it comes to our admission process. Each fall, we welcome about 1,300 to 1,400 incoming transfer students. So it's just really important to us that they do make up a key part of our student body, and we're not just leaning on admitting students straight out of high school, because we really do feel like it adds that much more depth to our classroom and conversations. It adds that many more layers of lived experience in the clubs and organizations we have on campus. So bringing around 1,300 to 1,400, the average GPA, or the middle 50 of our GPA for this past year, was a 3.83. I would keep in mind that of that GPA, with it being the middle 50, there are about 25% of students who are above that GPA, 25% of students who may have a GPA that's lower than that. Our goal is to always aim for the strongest GPA possible in the transfer process. And I'll also say, we'll get into it a little bit later as well. With that 383, obviously thinking about that 4.0 scale, a 383 is going to shift much more towards the A side of things, but it's a 3.83 in academically centered classes. It is fantastic if we have a student in front of us who has a 4.0, but if it's in soccer and underwater basket weaving and all that good stuff, it's not really showing that degree progress that we need to see to make a student competitive in the transfer process and successful in making sure they're wrapping up their USC degree on a timely timeline. In terms of where transfer students are coming from, so you can see that a good chunk of them are coming from the California community colleges. We do not have any preference of institutions that a student comes from. Our biggest concern is that it's a regionally accredited institution. But when it comes to the transfer process, the students that are going to be set up for success in the best position will be the California community college students. And the reason for that is that if you're thinking about a four-year institution, its goal is to have students graduate, to have you finish up your bachelor's degree there. At a two-year institution, their goal is to have you transfer out to another institution. So with our California CCs, they help to prepare you for that process of transferring, but also with the California community colleges, we maintain documents known as articulation agreements. Are any of you familiar with articulations? Anyone not familiar with it? You're in the middle, familiar with articulations? So we'll get into articulations for sure in just a bit. But articulations are essentially documents that will contain the complete listing of courses that will transfer to USC for credit, as well as how they'll transfer GE credit, major related, so on and so forth. We can't do that with a four-year institution. We can't be like, hey, UCLA, what do they need to transfer from there to here? With four-year institutions and out-of-state CCs, we maintain what's known as articulation histories. That's just a complete listing of the classes that are transferred in the past, and it could change at any time. But with the California community colleges, since we do have that relationship and it is a transfer institution, we work with them each year to update that list of coursework so you can see exactly what will transfer for credit, as well as what type of credit it will come in for. So that is why California CCs tend to be one of the best options for students to transfer from. But keep in mind, it's not any sort of preferential treatment. Like, you know, someone from SMC versus Stanford, we're still going to look at them the exact same way. And it's more likely than not that student at SMC is going to have a much stronger chance of getting exactly the classes they need to make a successful transfer to USC. It's not the computer. All right, you're going to go ahead and sign in and then grab one of each of those and start filling out the small one for me, please. Now, in terms of what we're looking for in our transfer process, so I think the big thing to start off with, there are no guarantees of admission in the USC admission process, period. But my hope is that by joining today and looking through the different resources we offer, you'll have a really strong understanding of what it takes to be a competitive applicant in our process. One of the first pieces we're looking for is for you to demonstrate a strong foundation of your academic work. So that goes back to the average GPA we were talking about. The average admitted GPA for this past year was a 3.83. And when it comes to strong work, it'll connect with that degree progress piece in just a little bit. We want to see that you're performing well, and we want to make sure it's happening in the right classes. The other piece we're looking for is our minimum math and writing requirement. So these two pieces are requirements for all students, regardless of which major they're thinking, whether they're thinking business, engineering, film. Every student that's transferring to USC must meet that minimum requirement of our minimum math and our minimum writing requirement, which we'll delve into shortly. Degree progress, that entails things like any major related requirements you might have for whatever major you're applying to, as well as GE progress. And the important note and call out to have for GE progress at USC, it is a graduation requirement, not a transfer requirement. You are not required to complete all of your GEs prior to transferring. However, you set yourself up to be a stronger applicant the more GEs you're able to complete prior to transfer. And finally, we're looking for full-time enrollment in 14 to 16 units. I am so sorry. Like I said before, I am not the admission counselor that works with IVC, so I just want to double check this statement first. Are most of your classes 3 units or 4 units? 3. So the piece that can be tricky for students that are at schools with 3 units for most of their classes, most classes at USC are 4 units. So when we say 14 to 16 units, it's about 4 classes that our students are carrying. But if you were to carry 4 classes here, that's 12 units in most cases. We'd like for you to aim for that 15 to 16 sweet spot. But at the same time, please keep in mind that if we're looking for you to mirror what USC students are doing, most USC students are carrying 4 to 5 classes. You won't be penalized for having 4 classes because that's what USC students are doing. But I would just keep in mind that If you hear about language, 15 to 16 units, 15 to 16 units, you're like, I have 12. Keep that piece in mind. How many academic classes are you carrying? We're looking for 4 to 5. So please don't stress yourself out if it's like, I have 12. So that is the general overview of things we're looking for. The best advice I can give is that mirroring of what USC students are doing when it comes to all of these pieces, but digging into each individually. So like I mentioned, all students, regardless of major, need to meet our minimum writing requirement and math requirement. The first piece is this math requirement, and this can be met in a couple of different ways. First could be through your high school coursework. So if you take the algebra, geometry, algebra 2 sequence with a C or better in high school, you can meet the requirement that way. If you take a higher level math in high school, like pre-calc, calculus with a C or better, that can also meet the requirement in high school. But you can also meet it through your college coursework by taking intermediate algebra or higher. Intermediate algebra is not a transferable class at USC, so that's one piece you want to keep in mind, but that is the minimum math you could take in college, your IVC, to meet that minimum math that is required for admission to USC. A really important call out, depending on what major some of you might be applying to, certain majors at USC do require a higher level math. So things like business administration, economics, engineering, we'll get into that again in just a moment, but you'll want to make sure that you stay aware of that if your particular major you're applying to does need a higher level math. If you're a student who, say you're going for business, which requires calculus, if you have not taken or not met the minimum math requirement prior to taking that calculus course, it would be that calculus course that can meet that requirement, because again, it's intermediate algebra or higher. But you want to be very aware of this minimum math requirement. This is definitely one that we don't really make concessions for. So you'll want to make sure you meet that requirement. The other basic requirement for all students, regardless of major, is our lower division writing requirement. So this is a class that's typically the second course in a 2-semester sequence, especially if you're one of our first-year students. This can happen in the spring term. I think that's the important thing to keep in mind with all of our requirements. You can have a required course in progress during the spring term of your application. If it's summer or later, we can't consider that course. You can't take the writing course that meets this requirement in summer of 24 because it would yield a grade after our admission process has already concluded. But you can have a required course in progress. So for our first year students, if you're in that first level course that meets the requirement, and then you're taking the class that actually meets the requirement in your second term, that's completely fine. You'll just want to make sure in your application, you're listing out what your in progress classes are so that we know it's occurring, not that you just kind of blanked on taking it. But we absolutely need to make sure that you're taking the course that is equivalent to USC's Writing 130. And when we dig into the articulation agreement, that's where I'll show you what that class is at IVC. So we have the first two basic building blocks. We have the minimum math requirement, the lower division writing requirement. The next piece you'll want to make sure that you have when you're building out a strong application are your general education classes. So again, remember, can you hear me on the audio? Okay, sorry, I'd asked and it was crickets. I'm like, okay, so keep talking. Like I mentioned before, GEs, they're graduation requirements, not transfer requirements, but you want to make sure you're making a strong effort towards these, especially if you're a student who's applying to a major that doesn't have major related requirements. The big things that we'll be looking for is GE completion, lower division writing requirement, and minimum math requirement. But for our GE structure, you'll see there are 8 categories and 10 classes across these categories. Let me try to move the share bar so you can see the top of this. Way to hide this. I'll do it later. But you can see right here under category B and category C, and we're recording this, so no need to take pictures or anything. Under categories B and C, they both require 2 classes each. So it's 10 classes across 8 categories. The reason why I say graduation requirement, not transfer requirement, you need these to finish up your degree at USC. It is not possible to knock all of these out in your first year. If you're a first year transfer student, we require at least 2 of your GEs to happen at USC. So one piece of advice that I always give to transfer students, be strategic with which GEs you take. If you're a student who just thrives in math and science and the arts and history are not really of interest to you, you have to take at least 2 GEs at USC. So why not save those 2 GE subjects or categories that you struggle with until you're at USC? Don't butcher your transfer GPA taking a subject that just doesn't appeal to you, because you have to take at least 2 at USC anyway. But the more GEs you can complete, the better of an applicant you will set yourself up to be. All right. was a way to make this smaller, but, or to like make the share bar. There we go. There we go. All right. If you just joined, go ahead and grab one of each of those for me and start filling out the small card. And then you'll also want to sign in. All right. So the first three pieces, we got minimum math requirement, lower division writing requirement, general education classes. The fourth piece that's going to make up a strong transfer applicant are your major requirements and recommendation. So if you, in that book that you have, the transferring to USC brochure, flip to page 12, I want to say. And for those who are joining via Zoom, if you Google transferring to USC brochure, you'll be able to pull up a PDF version of that. Is page 12, does that say application process or what's on page 12? Excellent. Yeah, I've been doing this for a minute too long. So this additional coursework by major section, this will be the section that you want to pay attention to when it comes to the specific major that you're applying to. So like I mentioned, some majors at USC don't have any additional requirements. But for some, they're looking for students to complete specific coursework in order to be admitted to USC. So if you take, for example, astronomy and business. So for an applicant to astronomy, you'll see a couple of different things in this section. You'll see the major listed under the school that it is. You'll also see in that column that says foreign language, either a check mark or it's blank. If you see a check mark in that foreign language column next to your major that you're applying to, that means that we're looking for you to complete a foreign language in order to graduate from USC. View the foreign languages in the same way that you would view general education classes. They're graduation requirements from USC, not transfer requirements. However, in doing a little bit more research behind what some of the bigger stumbling blocks were for our transfer students when it came to completing their degree at USC, we found that it was always foreign language. And the reason for that is that you'll get to USC, get deep into your degree, and then senior year, it's like, oh, Spanish what? Spanish 1? Take that again. So we always recommend that students, if you're applying to a major that has a foreign language requirement, you start getting the ball rolling prior to transfer. One, because it's showing us another piece of, I'll be right with you, another piece of degree preparation. But two, just because it can be a little bit difficult to kind of circle back to that once you've already started getting real niche into your degree program. If you have an AP score of 4 or higher on some foreign language examination from high school, so that could be Spanish, French, Chinese, Italian, a 4 or higher can waive that requirement. Also, if you are fluent in a language other than English, that can be used to waive the requirement. But I believe it needs to be that it's a language that's taught at USC in our foreign language department. You had a question as well about that.
What about if you already met the language requirements from your high school course?
So you can't meet that requirement in high school. It has to be college coursework or an AP examination taken in high school with a 4 or higher. But that's the foreign language piece. The next section that you'll see in this additional coursework by major section are the specific classes that we'll need you to take for your major. So you'll see for astronomy, they recommend Calculus 1, Calculus 2, Calc 3, so on and so forth. Again, when you see that it's a recommended course, we want to see that you begin the sequence. So if you're in your first year here at IVC and planning to apply to transfer to USC in this academic year, obviously you're probably not going to be able to make it all the way from Math 125 through Physics 153. And these are sequential classes on top of that, so it's even harder to get through all of them. But seeing that you start that sequence and you begin that pursuit every semester of the classes that are recommended for your degree program or for your major shows degree progress for USC. So we want to see that you start that sequence, especially if you're in your first year. We understand that you're not going to finish that sequence, but we want to see that in each term you're working towards it. Now for certain majors, they have required classes for admission. So for astronomy, those are the recommended courses. Those are the classes you'd be taking for that major at USC. But if in that additional coursework by major section, you see required for admission, go ahead and grab one of each of those for me and you'll start filling out the small one. Also be sure to sign in for a counseling team. If in that additional coursework by major section, you see required for admission, it means exactly that. We are not able to admit a student to that major without that course completed. So we need to make sure that you are completing the process required for admission. The best example we can give is our business degree program. So you'll see for someone applying to the Marshall School of Business, there is not a foreign language requirement, which I to this day do not understand why a business program would not have a foreign language requirement, but there it is. They also though need to make sure you're completing the lower division writing requirement in the equivalent of either Math 118 or Math 125. We do not budge on this. If it is a course that is required for admission to your major, you must make sure you have it. Like we mentioned, you can have required classes in progress during the spring term, but the big piece you'll want to make sure you write in your application are your classes in progress so that we know it's occurring. Also, if you're a student, we're looking at the rest of your application, you're seeming competitive in our admission process, we would not be able to render an admission decision until that class returns a grade. So it is something to keep in mind. But it is not helpful to tell a student, we need Math 118 or Math 125 in order to be admitted to the Marshall School of Business. That's not the course title here at IVC. So I'm going to jump now into the articulation agreement and talk about how it's that. So for those who are on Zoom, I'll drop the link in the chat for you. And for those here in person, give me just one moment. I hid the meeting controls, that would be why. So there is the link to the articulation agreement for those who are joining in Zoom. For those here in person, this is the articulation agreement site. So if you just Google USC articulation agreement, this would be what pops up for the first search result. What you'll want to do is navigate to the region that you're in and then select the school that you're attending. With any articulation, this is how all articulations are broken down. So if any of you are attending several community colleges, same way that you want to go about searching for it. This first portion would be general requirements for all majors. These will be your GEs. So this first portion of any articulation will list out the GE coursework. And a quick show of hands, did any of you start college prior to fall of 2015? Okay, cool. Just because it's a different GE structure and different requirements that we have. But if you did, you can reach out to us and we'll fill you in on them. But this first portion will list out all of the GEs that you can take here at IVC that will transfer to USC for credit. So you'll see category A, the arts. You can take dance 78, you could take film 71, you could take photography 1. We don't need you to complete all of these. We just need to make sure you take at least one of these courses to meet category A. Under categories B and C, like I mentioned, those require 2 classes each, but it doesn't need to be that you take history 1 and 2 or humanities 1 and 2. You could take philosophy 10 and history 41 or poli-sci 5 and English lit 22. Whatever combination of classes you want to go about taking in order to meet that requirement is fine. So on and so forth. The big piece you'll want to pay attention to on the articulation is if you ever see the word with. If you see the word with, that means you need both of those classes in order to meet that requirement. So you'll see it in instances where there is a lab science. We need to make sure you're taking the course itself with the lab that's connected to it in order to meet that requirement. And you'll also see it in instances like below. Let's go ahead for just a moment. Instances like this. So in instances where you see just 2 separate classes, what that means is that that one course, Math 24 Honors, does not cover everything we need it to cover in order to meet Math 225 at USC. So a student would need to take both Math 24 Honors and Math 26 at IVC in order to cover all the material that's covered in Math 225 at USC. But because you had to take that additional work, you would also receive credit for Math 245 at USC.
I have a question about the GEs. So can one GE like count as 2?
I'll get to that in just a second. I just wanted to cover the great question. I just wanted to cover that with piece. So if you ever see a with on an articulation, please just make sure you're doing both of those classes or that class in that lab, because that's what's needed to meet the requirement at USC. But to your point, like I mentioned, we like to work smarter, not harder. There are certain GEs that will meet multiple requirements. So for instance, you'll typically see it between categories B and C and categories G and H. It won't always be the case, but in cases where that is happening, it's a course that's being offered that term and a course you're actually interested in, I would definitely make sure you're taking that effort to go towards it, because again, it's just saving time, money, and meeting more requirements. But for instance, if you look at category G, you see that history 24 and history 30 are 2 classes that can be taken to meet that requirement. But if you scroll back up to category C, you will see Ooh, I picked a bad one. That one doesn't cross over. Let's try another one. Ethnic studies 20, 30, and 40. Perfect. So if you take ethnic studies 20 or 30 or 40, that'll meet GE category G. But if you look up here, you can see that it'll also meet one of the category C classes. So in that instance, taking one of those 3 courses can meet all of category G and one of the category C classes. We call it double dipping at USC. You'll also see double dipping happen with major related requirements. So for instance, you need the equivalent of Math 118 or Math 125 to be admitted to Marshall at USC. I'll skip ahead again. I'm going to come back up here. If you look at the equivalent of 125, that would be Math 3A here at IVC. But if you scroll back up to the general education structure, you'll see that Math 3A is also a class that meets GE category F. So between categories B and C and G and H, there's some crossover where if you take one class, it can meet multiple requirements, but you'll also see that crossover happening between some of our major related requirements and our general education structure. And again, if it's ever a class that's being offered that you have the interest in, it's always a good idea to pursue those because it can be working harder, not smarter. Going back in sequential order though, so we've gone through all of the general education classes that are above. The next portion you'll want to pay attention to on any articulation is a lower division writing requirement. So the class that meets our lower division writing requirement for admission here at IVC is going to be English Writing 2 or English Writing 2 Honors. You must have this class in order to be admissible to USC. But again, this is typically the second course in a sequence. I'm assuming English 1 is that starting class. If you have English 1 right now and you're taking English 1 or English 2 in the spring or 2 honors, it's completely fine to have that class in progress during the spring. You'll just want to make sure to list out your courses on your application so we know it's in progress. The next piece you'll find are the foreign language classes that can get that requirement started. I know it feels a bit slim here in terms of the offerings, but just know, keep in mind, it is a graduation requirement, not a transfer requirement. It's of course fantastic if we see you get this requirement started, but if not, just know that most students are still admissible. If you're applying to the Annenberg School for Communication Journalism, if you're applying to be a French major or a Spanish major, so on and so forth, obviously we'd want to see that you start these requirements prior to a transfer to USC. But again, keep that piece in mind of grad requirement, not transfer requirement, though certain majors do like to see that you start it prior to a transfer. The second portion of any articulation are going to be the course-to-course equivalencies. So this is the only portion of an articulation that will list USC course titles. And this is to help students as they're trying to figure out the major related classes they need to take. So remember a few minutes ago, we were talking about the business requirement, equivalent of Math 118 or Math 125. Again, it's not helpful because that's not the course title here at IVC. So the way that you use this course-to-course equivalency section is you navigate down here, you'll see all the USC course titles listed on the right, all the IVC classes listed on the left. If you're applying to the Marshall School of Business and you're trying to figure out what Math 118 or 125 is, you can navigate to this section and see that at IVC, Math 3A or 3A Honors will meet Math 125 at USC. You'll also see that Math 11 meets Math 118. It's an either or situation for Marshall. They don't need you to have the equivalent of Math 118 and 125. Whichever one works for you is fine to take. But this will be the only portion listing USC course titles, and you can also use it for any other major, be it biology, chemistry, econ, so on and so forth. The other portion you'll want to pay attention to is all courses that transfer for credit. So every class that was listed above this, your GEs, writing requirement, foreign language, course-to-course equivalencies, those will also be listed down here in this section as well. But it's really important to call out, just because a class is transferable doesn't mean it's something you should immediately jump towards. And what I mean by that is, it is phenomenal if administration of justice 2 and 61 are transferable, but if they're not transferring in as general education credit, as major related credit, it's really not giving you as much degree progress as we would hope for. The main things you're going to want to focus on are your GEs, is the lower division writing requirement and the minimum math requirement if you haven't met it, and any major related requirements. One thing that I see a lot when it comes to transfer students, that's kind of a stumbling block, and it's a fair assumption to make, but not quite what we're looking for, is if a student wants to major in communication, they take 1,000,001 communication classes, But their degree progress at USC is a bit lacking because we want the communication classes to happen at USC. What we're wanting to see prior to a transfer are GEs, are major related requirements. So just because it's a subject that lines up with your degree program doesn't necessarily mean that it's a subject that we want you to fill all of your course schedule taking. We don't want to see a course schedule full of comm classes or business classes. We want to see classes that are kind of those preparation stages, and your major related classes would then happen at USC. Any questions about that piece? So this will be all courses that transfer for credit. If you keep scrolling down, you will find the no man's land courses that do not transfer for credit. So these are going to be classes that we want to make sure we're trying to avoid. If your goal is to transfer to USC, we want to make sure we're trying to avoid classes that do not transfer for credit at USC. So that's what you'll find that's what you'll find down here. There are some notes throughout the articulation about the modality of the class. With the pandemic, some schools have fully moved back in person, some still have that online versus in-person modality. There are notes here that you'll want to pay attention to about the modality of a class. Foreign language and lab science are classes that we need to happen in person in the traditional classroom setting. If you have a class that you're taking online coursework is not our preference. We prefer traditional in-person settings, but you can speak to your USC admission counselor about if you're taking that online course just to double check, is transferability to USC. But this is an articulation in a nutshell. Again, for my online folks, I sent the chat in the chat what that link is. For my people in person, you'll just Google USC articulation agreement, and there's more information in those brochures about how to find it.
Also, it's on our Transfer Center's website under private schools and the USC, both the general ed and also the major prep.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, let's hop back over to the presentation. So we've talked about the basic building blocks. We've got minimum math, lower division writing requirement, general education classes, and then major related classes. When it comes to those resources, we have articulation agreements, which we mentioned are documents we maintain with California community colleges. We also have histories. Like I mentioned, those are for four-year institutions and out-of-state community colleges and can only be built up as well as the history of students who've had transfer in the past. You can also find your articulation agreement on the history site for IVC. You just navigate down to which school you're looking for. Another helpful tool that you can lean on is our transfer planning guide. And then we also have our transfer credit information site. I would strongly recommend, it's not the most exciting piece of advice, but it is very helpful. This brochure that you have in front of you, it's also available online. Please read it cover to cover. It provides such helpful information. We as admission counselors refer to it very often in our review process, especially when it comes to those credit policies. In the back cover, I believe the back 2 pages, that's where you'll find more information about the credit policies you want to pay attention to. And your transfer center also has really great resources. But this brochure in and of itself, I've been with our office for almost 7 years. I still refer to this on a weekly basis when I'm helping out students. So it's definitely a really great resource to lean on, coupled with articulation agreements, coupled with things like the credit information and the transfer planning guide. Would strongly recommend utilizing all of those. Let me navigate. All right, when it comes to the different credit policies we're leaning on. So in terms of things you'll want to be sure to submit with your application, we need to see transcripts for all institutions you have attended. So we need to see your final high school transcript with the date of graduation listed on it. And post-grad, we need to make sure that any college you have attended, you're sending in that transcript for admission. Even if IVC is your primary school and you're just taking one quick class at Saddleback, we need to make sure we're having that reported in your application, and you need to make sure that you're sending in that official transcript with your application. If we're missing any documents, it delays our process of review as we go back and forth with you to make sure we're receiving that document. It should be listed in that brochure, but I'll go ahead and say it out loud now. The website that you'll want to be sure to have official transcripts sent to, or sorry, not website, the email address is U as in university, E trans, T-R-A-N-S. And I can follow up with that later on as well. That'll be the official email address you want to have any official transcript sent to. If you personally just email a transcript to uetrans@usc.edu, it'll bounce back. They don't want to receive it from the student. They want to make sure they're receiving it from an official source like Parchment, Naviance, your registrar. So uetrans is going to be the email address to have official transcripts sent to at USC. And I can, again, write that down for you. The other piece we'll be looking for, like I mentioned, is transferable coursework. We want to make sure that the majority of your transcript is showing courses that will transfer for credit to USC and that grant you that degree progress. When it comes to unit limits, we do not have a minimum number of units that you need to transfer. Students are able to transfer in their first year, but if they do have fewer than 30 transferable units at the time of transfer, we will look a little bit more closely at their high school coursework. We're not going to build a decision based on your high school performance. We get that for some students, high school is a little bit harder, and then they get to college and completely turn it around. But if you're a student who's in your very first year with fewer than 30 transferable units, we'll look at your high school performance just to see a little bit better idea of your academic trending since you've begun college. There is a maximum number of units that someone can bring in. 64 is the maximum number of units someone can transfer to USC. And the reason for that is that most of our degree programs at USC are 128 units. So we want to make sure students are spending at least 2 years of their college experience at USC prior to graduating. So no minimum, but a maximum of 64 transferable units. When it comes to remediating certain grades, at the transfer level, if you took a class and didn't perform quite as well as you'd hoped, and then retake the class, both of those classes will be counted in your transfer GPA as we're reviewing your application. So we're not able to specifically lean on just the remediated grade. We need to calculate both grades. Any questions about credit policies?
So wait, the extra, like, if you go over the max, would that convert into like?
So what they wind up doing if a student has more than 64 transferable units, the first thing they're going to lean on when transferring in any of that coursework are things like your major related requirements, general education requirements. Like they're not going to first go to your elective courses because that's not helpful as much when it comes to degree progress. But if you have more and say that more is built up of major related general education classes, the articulation department will work with the student to try and make sure that that coursework transfers in so you're not having to take the same GE over again. But it may be a matter of you're not taking in more than that 64 units, but you have the requirements. So perhaps there's more elective space built in for you once you get to USC.
Oh,
But 64 is the max.
all right, and you said that for GE, like, you need to take 2 GEs. Okay.
At USC. And it's 2 that are in the Dornside College. So within our GE structure, there's a lot more space since we restructured in fall of 2015. So it could be that you have a GE that's in the engineering school or the dance school or the journalism school. With the GE structure as it exists now, with there being more space, these 2 GEs need to happen at USC and they need to be GEs that are in Dornside, which is the General College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences at USC. In terms of app components, so you do still need to submit a common application at the transfer level. For those who may have applied in the past, same location, you'll just want to select transfer application instead. Like I mentioned, we want to make sure you're receiving your final high school transcript with your graduation date listed. One issue that we see quite a lot at the transfer level is students, especially students who have applied in the past, will just resend their mid-year transcript from their first year application. The issue with that is that it doesn't have your final graduation date on it, and it also doesn't have your final term of high school classes listed on it. So you'll want to make sure it's a final transcript with your grad date listed on it. You can reach out to your former high school and just have them send an official copy to USC and it'll be attached to your application. Like I mentioned, we also want to make sure we're receiving official transcripts to all of the colleges you have attended. And there on screen is that email address I was mentioning that those official transcripts need to be sent to. Please keep in mind we're looking for official transcripts and we need to make sure it's coming from an official source like Naviance, Parchment, your registrar, in order for us to receive it and include it in your application for review. There are also certain departments that have additional components like portfolios, letters of recommendation, so on and so forth. You'll want to make sure that you stay on top of that. That brochure will also list under the additional coursework by major section if you're applying to a major that does have additional pieces that we need to make sure we're receiving. At SC, we define an international applicant as anyone who requires a visa to study in the US. So there are, and I'll be right with you, there are 2 additional pieces that we do need to make sure we're receiving for any international applicants. The first piece is going to be an English proficiency exam score. That can be met a couple of different ways. It can be the TOEFL, IELTS, PTE, and we'll accept the Duolingo at-home exam. Any number of those things can be used or can be submitted to meet that English language proficiency exam score. And we just need to make sure we're requiring it since English is the primary language of instruction at USC. The other piece that we need to make sure we're receiving, USC is a need-blind institution. We don't have a sense of a student's financial situation when they're applying, and we don't want that to form the basis of our decision. But we are required by the federal government, in order for a student to secure a visa to study in the US, they need to show 1 year's cost of attendance in liquid assets in order to get that visa. So for our international applicants, we do also need to receive a financial statement that shows 1 year's cost of attendance in liquid assets submitted with the application. Without these two pieces, if any of you identify as an international student, your application is considered incomplete. So we want to make sure we're getting these pieces in for us. Really important to note, we do not consider documented or undocumented students international in our process, so they're not required to submit those two pieces of info. You had a question. Do you still have a question?
No, I don't.
Okay, perfect. If there are any other questions about this, for sure, we can follow up later with your admission counselor via email. So in terms of timeline, if you are applying to one of our portfolio or audition programs listed here on screen, those majors have a hard deadline of December 1st. And the reason for that is that we need additional time to review those portfolio or audition pieces that are a part of the application. So December 1st is a hard deadline for those students listed there on screen. But for everyone else, the final date to apply to transfer to USC is going to be February 15th. This is the final date to apply. This is also the final date, or this is also the merit scholarship date. There are no additional pieces that you need to submit with your application to be considered for those merit scholarships. You just need to complete your or submit your completed application by their respective deadline. And that's for both December 1st and February 15th. By May 31st, all students who have applied will receive either an admission decision or their request for spring grades. So for those who've applied in the past, this is another really big way that the transfer process differs from the first year process. At the first year level, there's that one date where all decisions are going out. At the transfer level, decisions are on a rolling basis. So as we have the information that we need to make a decision, that's when we'll go ahead and move forward and do so. If Billy in your calculus course received an admission decision and you received a spring grade request or you're still waiting to hear back, please don't stress. It is very individualized at the transfer level. We will make sure we're communicating with you about pieces of the application that we need or the timeline that we'll be operating under for your specific application. But just know that by May 31st, you'll have that admission decision or a spring grade request. A spring grade request is not indicative of an admit or a deny decision. It's just our way of saying that we need more information.
Since it's based on rolling admissions, does it mean that the spot for transfer students can be?
No, so that's another thing where the question was, since it's based on rolling admission, does that mean that spaces fill up? We're very intentional in our review process to make sure that strong students aren't being denied eventually because we haven't reserved a space for them in our class. So as we're reviewing, we make sure we're making note, like, make sure we're holding space for the student, but I need more information for them. So getting a spring grade request will not be any sort of, you're late, you won't get an admission, you won't be admitted because, other students were admitted prior to you. Our process is built to make sure we're holding space for those strong students that we need to see those spring grades from. And by mid-July, I know it runs very late compared to a lot of the other schools you might be applying to, but just know that by mid-July, all applicants will have a final decision. We work really, really hard to try as much as possible to front load those decisions so you're not waiting until the middle of summer to have a month to make a decision about where you'll live, what you're majoring in, how you'll go about getting the classes. But there are a chunk of students where, because we're waiting for spring grades or they might be on a quarter system, it can run as late as mid-July. But largely we try our best to front load it and get as many admission decisions out by May 31st as possible. Any timeline questions?
Is that the deadline? For all of
The whole application, yes. So the whole completed application, if you're applying to one of those majors listed under December 1st, the entire application is due, both the portfolio as well as the common application. Any other timeline questions? I know I have a chat box here in the Zoom. We'll get to that at the very end. All right, now in terms of financial aid, so like I mentioned, we are a need-blind institution with the exception of the situation for our international applicants who are required to submit by the federal government. Need-blind means exactly that. When I'm reviewing your application, I don't want your ability or inability to afford USC to be the deciding factor in your admission decision. But we also want to make sure that we're meeting 100% of demonstrated need in our process. To do that, we're going to need both the FAFSA and the CSS profile, which is available on the College Board's website. FAFSA is going to determine federal aid, whereas the CSS profile determines institutional aid, so how much money USC specifically is giving towards your education. And we need to make sure we're receiving both of those documents by March 2nd. I also strongly recommend reach out to financial aid teams now. I think a lot of times, and this is more common on the first year level, not so much the transfer level, but it still happens. I think a lot of times students will wait until they have an admission decision in hand to start opening and engaging those conversations with financial aid teams. And then they're forced to make really big decisions on really tight timelines. Our financial aid team is there. They are more than happy to talk with prospective students, not just admitted, committed, or current students. So please don't be afraid to reach out to them with any questions. Their contact information should be listed in that brochure for you. But also on their website, any school that receives any form of federal funding is required to have a net price calculator on their website. If you navigate to their website and enter information on your family's financial situation, you'll receive an estimate. The word estimate of what your potential financial aid package could look like. But I just strongly recommend engaging in those conversations now. There are smaller merit scholarships available at the transfer level that students are considered for just by applying. There's no additional forms or essays you have to submit to be considered for those, but they do not cover the full cost of attendance. So I definitely recommend reaching out to the financial aid team. Also, please do not be afraid to look into outside scholarships. I was my parents' third kid. They were so sick of the college song and dance by the time I was ready. I decided I wanted to go to a private school in 2009, which is a great year for the economy. That money is out there. Please don't be afraid to go for it. I got one from my bank, from my elementary school, a sorority that I did not join. I'm like, it's not in your fine print. And that's a you problem. Don't be free to bring in any outside funding because the first thing that the financial aid team is going to apply it to is any loans that might be in your package. So constantly working to lower the amount of debt that a student might be graduating with. But again, they are more than happy to talk with prospective students of all levels, both first year and transfer, if you have any questions. Just to recap some of the resources that you can use, I'm getting kind of tight on time. Transferring to USC brochure that you have in front of you is one huge resource. It's also available online. If you Google transferring to USC brochure, it'll be the first result that pops up. Those articulation agreements and histories that we talked through are also helpful. The individual academic departments you may be considering, they host both in-person and virtual information sessions to provide more insight into their program. Your USC admission counselor, who is not me, but I'll provide the information on how to get in touch with Kelsey Bradshaw Carroll in just a moment, is also another great resource. And then finally, that USC credit website can be another huge help. We do speak a little bit about transfer credit policies at the end of that brochure, but the website goes a bit more in depth with it. If you use this QR code, go ahead and scan it. Everything or most US-based institutions operate what's known as a territory management system. So that's where everyone in their office is responsible for a part of the US or a part of the world. So if you go ahead and scan this or just enter that link or just search Find My Counselor USC and enter the school that you attend, it'll pop up with your admission counselor's contact information. If you are a student who attends multiple community colleges, the one where most of your units are happening or the majority of your classes are happening, that'll be the admission counselor you want to be in touch with throughout the process because they'll be the one that's ultimately reviewing your application. That has been